Chapter 11.
By the time Colonel Pakpakat reached a comm station, Lady Luck had moved within 2 kilometers of the Vagabond, and was closing at a leisurely rate that would nonetheless place it alongside in a matter of minutes. The sight of it brought the threat ruffles on Pakpakat's back to full flourish, and his throat turned crimson, a display no one in his bridge crew had ever seen before.
"Calrissian, you are a madman," said Pakpakat with an icy evenness. "You will lose more than your commission over this, I promise you that."
"Colonel, I'll take that as your promise to do everything you can to help keep me alive long enough to satisfy your fine sense of outrage. I understand the fleet doesn't allow you to court-martial a corpse."
"There are other uses for corpses," said Pakpakat with a cold smile. "While you are still alive, perhaps you would like to place your justifications on the record."
"Gladly," said Lando. "Your decision to exclude us from the foray team endangered not only the lives of Bijo and his men, but the whole mission. And your attitude during yesterday's briefing convinced me that you'd never give any real weight to anything we brought to the table."
"You mean to blame me for your recklessness?" Pakpakat raged, his frosty reserve vaporizing in an instant. "You brought nothing to the table. You obviously came here with secret information about this vessel, which you denied having and denied to us."
"Secret information? What are you blathering about, Colonel?"
"You as much as admitted it. You are the one who knew that the foray team would be in danger. You knew that the target was expecting a countersign which you already possessed."
"Colonel, you don't know what you're talking about. I had a hunch about what the builders of this ship out here were doing, and this was the only way to play my hunch."
"You expect me to believe that you risked your lives and your ship on a hunch?"
Lando chuckled, a low, smooth sound. "You've never played sabacc with me, have you, Colonel? You have to be willing to lose big if you're hoping to win big. No one ever got rich wagering 1 credit at a time."
"I hope you've enjoyed your little game, General. But I had always understood that hiding cards was considered dishonest."
"Colonel, we didn't have any secret information. We simply happened to look in the right place in the Imperial Archives, and just barely in time, too. Now we're in, and we're going to do what we can while we're here. I trust you have the recorders running by now." Pakpakat muted the link and looked away from the comm unit toward his operations officer.
"Do we have the recording of the key signal Lady Luck used to enter the restricted zone?"
"Yes, sir."
"Is the tractor beam on D-89 strong enough to tie up Lady Luck?"
"Easily," said the operations officer with contempt. "She's just a civilian pleasure yacht."
"Is the interdiction field up?"
"Yes, sir. The field is operational."
"Then cue up that key, and get ready to send the picket in to yank them out of there."
Pakpakat turned back to the comm unit and opened the link.
"We're doing the best we can," he told Lando, "but some systems were in the middle of a calibration diagnostic, getting ready for our attempt later today, and they're not back up yet. Can you stand off at your present range and give us a little time? A few minutes ought to be enough."
"I guess that's reasonable enough, but I hope you're not thinking about trying to send the foray team in," Lando said warningly. "We've talked about it here, and we have doubts that the key will work a second time."
"No," said Pakpakat. "We have no plans to do that. Just stand by." He broke the link. "Ready?"
"Yes, sir."
"Then do it."
Since making its pass at the Vagabond the day before, D-89 had been flying formation with Glorious, awaiting its next job as the second spotter platform for the long-range stereo recordings to be made of the foray team's contact. When its real space engines suddenly roared to life, it had only a few kilometers to cover before reaching the invisible boundary of the Vagabond's security sphere. D-89 was still accelerating when the Vagabond hailed it, a signal heard on board Lady Luck and Glorious as well. Lobot was the first aboard the former to realize the cause.
"There's another vessel approaching the Vagabond."
Almost at the same time, 3PO said,
"Master Lando, that is not the same sequence."
"I know," said Lando grimly. "I can hear it. Ah, I was afraid he was going to try this." The signal from the Vagabond ended, and the response began, relayed from Glorious through D-89's own transmitters. But even before the response was complete, a fierce blue light began dancing over the entire aft third of the Vagabond's hull. "Hold on, everyone!" Lando cried on seeing it. He threw himself across the console, reaching for the control that would boost Lady Luck's combat shields with the full output of her engines. But his hand had not reached the switch when the cockpit was flooded with light, a light so harsh that even 3PO flinched from it, a light so cold that it made Lando shiver. Half a dozen alarms began to sound at once, as though the yacht itself were crying out in surprise, and piercing the cacophony was the keening wail of a frantic R2. From the vantage of those watching on the bridge of the Glorious, it all seemed to take only a moment, a few heartbeats. Those who glanced down at their consoles in that moment missed it. When their heads swiveled and jerked upward at the collective gasp, all that was left to see was the sudden spreading cloud of flotsam in space between the cruiser and the Vagabond. The blue glow had made the Vagabond suddenly bright on the cruiser's screens. Then 3 beams of energy had lanced out from the tail of the ship, knifing across space like searchlights, sweeping toward the same target. The beams intersected, merged, and at that moment, that point, there was a small but spectacularly intense explosion. At the same time, all the telemetry from D-89 vanished from the bridge consoles of the Glorious. Then the lances disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, and there was silence. The Vagabond dropped back into near invisibility as small secondary explosions lit the atomized debris from within, like tiny nova stars inside a hot nebula. "What about Lady Luck?" Pakpakat quietly asked a still-shaken tracking technician.
We can't see through the cloud until it disperses. It's too heavily ionized. But the Marauder still has Lady Luck on her screens."
"How very interesting," Pakpakat said, straightening to his full height.
"Colonel, Captain Hanser of the Marauder asking for your instructions."
"Tell him to wait," said Pakpakat, turning toward the bridge windows. "Imaging, replay the attack, half speed. Everyone, watch your monitors. Let's see what we can learn about the General's friends." One by one, Lando silenced the alarms. The radiation alarm, the proximity alarm, the contact alarm, the systems alarm, the anomaly alarm. The ship seemed unharmed, even untouched. What was that?
"I'm showing an explosion 8 kilometers aft of us," said Lobot. "I believe we have now seen a demonstration of the weapons technology of the Kella."
Holy Queen of Sailors! Tell me it wasn't the Foray shuttle, Lobot. Lobot opened a link to one of Glorious's unsecured processors.
"It was the Ferret D-89. No one was on board."
Thank the stars. With a touch on the console before him, Lando signaled the cruiser. "Colonel, one of these days you're going to learn to stop ignoring what I tell you." "Any time you care to start telling me the truth, General, I will be happy to listen." "The truth?" "Yes, the truth," Pakpakat snarled. "You could begin with who you're working for, what's inside the target, and why you chose to become a traitor to the New Republic. The Vagabond allowed you to approach, and now it's protecting you." "General, I warned you that the key might not work a second time. The challenge to the Ferret was different than the challenge to us, probably to stop someone from doing exactly what you tried to do, namely snoop and steal the key. If the Vagabond's protecting us, it's only because it thinks we belong here." "Are you still claiming that all this is simply the outcome of a gambler's lucky hunch?" "Colonel, we're breaking and entering.
We're not here to keep an appointment. Then why is the Vagabond still here?
Lando looked up and stared out Lady Luck's front port. The weapon that had been used against the ferret would be equally effective against the interdiction pickets. And with even one of them destroyed or disabled, there would be nothing to stop the Vagabond's escape. "I don't know, Colonel," said Lando. "Maybe she's waiting for us. I'm going to start closing with her again and see what happens." With a light touch, he edged the thruster control forward. "In the meantime, if you'll stop trying to send in the cavalry long enough to listen, we'll pass along everything we know, or think we do." R2 and 3PO had been having their own conversation at the rear of the yacht's flight deck, and now 3PO stepped forward to where Lando and Lobot sat.
Sir.
"Wait, 3PO.
Sir, R2 says that the new sequence sent by the Kella vessel does not appear in the information from the survey archives."
"What?"
R2 says he is unable to determine what the correct response might be.
Lando shook his head. "I feel like I'm in a spelling bee, and the kid in front of me just went out on a word I don't know either. Colonel, are you getting all this?"
Getting it, yes. Understanding it, no.
"We matched the original signal from the Vagabond to the genetic code of a species called the Kella. The correct response was the next portion of the code," Lando said. "But it interrogated the ferret with a different sequence, and we don't seem to know what comes next. Maybe Lobot has an explanation. He's the one who found the match in the first place."
An explanation is readily available,
Lobot said.
but it will not help us with our problem.
I'd like to hear it anyway.
said Pakpakat. Lando nodded his agreement.
I have reviewed the history of the records concerning the Kella. They were discovered by the Third General Survey, which was the Republic's first comprehensive examination of habitable worlds in the galactic arms,
Lobot said.
But the only report is from the survey vessel. By the time the contact vessel arrived 8 years later, all of the Kella were dead, and more than 1/3 of the planet was covered by ice up to 100 meters thick.
All dead? What happened?
An asteroid impact was postulated,
said Lobot.
The contact vessel collected genetic samples and technological artifacts from 2 sites, but it wasn't equipped for archaeological work, and there were many worlds with live populations waiting for a contact vessel. Kella was marked for a follow-up visit by an archaeological team, and the contact vessel continued on, but there was no follow-up.
"Why not?" Lando demanded.
The Third General Survey was never completed,
said Pakpakat.
It was terminated at the outbreak of the Clone Wars.
The Colonel is correct, Lobot said. All survey and contact vessels were taken over by the Imperial Navy, with the Third General Survey only 61% complete.
"Which means we have all the information we're going to have about the Kella?" Lando asked. "There must be more somewhere. They obviously had interstellar travel. They must have had neighbors, trading partners."
"Perhaps the Colonel's staff can locate such information," said Lobot. "I have been unable to locate any other references to this planet and its inhabitants."
I have people working on it, Pakpakat said curtly. If I had been given this information when you first developed it, I might have had some results for you by now.
The Vagabond now nearly filled Lady Luck's forward view screen. "Colonel, you can deal 2 different players the same hand. One of them will win with it, and the other lose. If we had given you the chance to play our hunch, what would you have done with it? Where would B. Joe Hamax be right now?" After a long pause, the intelligence officer said,
Point taken, General.
"Thank you, Colonel. We're getting pretty close now, as I guess you can tell. The way I see things, I'd better start concentrating on the game going on out here," Lando said. "We'll keep in touch, but that's not going to be my first worry.
If you would leave an audio channel open,
You'll probably want to pick up all our cockpit sensor feeds. Lobot can route them to you,"
we will do what we can to assist you.
said Pakpakat. Lando knew that those must have been difficult words for the Hortek to say. "You'll hear us yell," he said. "But if you'd really like to help, maybe you want to see what you can do about getting a ship sent to Kella fast." There may still be answers there that we're going to need before this is over. With Lady Luck cruising slowly along the hull of the Vagabond at a distance of only 100 meters, Lando felt as though he were seeing the ship clearly for the first time. At a distance, the hull seemed lumpy and irregular. Up close, it looked like nothing so much as a bundle of massive tree trunks woven round with thick, criss-crossing vines, which had grown into the metallic bark. But the scale was all wrong for that comparison. The vines were large enough in cross-section to park the yacht inside one, and the trunks would easily have swallowed the bulk of the cruiser. "Looks a bit like a foss," said Lando. "What do you think about those extrusions?"
I can't tell whether the design is symbolic or functional, said Lobot. There is no repeating pattern that I can perceive.
"Maybe those extrusions are some sort of energy conduit for the weapons," said Lando. "I can't see anything else that looks like a weapon."
It is possible that their weapons use surface charge capacitance, said Lobot. SCC is considered unsafe for task force operations, but single vessels can accumulate very large surface charges without affecting internal systems. Deep space is a good insulator.
So the entire surface might be an accumulator for that weapon we saw?
Yes, the extrusions, as you call them, increase the surface area. The actual weapon apertures could be quite small.
Perhaps we should send a greeting message, said 3PO. I would be happy to offer my services.
Not yet, 3PO, said Lando. Look, there's the primary attach site that Bijo was planning to use. There. Swing the spot up and to the right.
That's not a hatchway, said Lobot after a moment's inspection. It's a surface marking. There are no seams.
The secondary attach site is farther forward. We'll go take a look at that. General Calrissian, Hock-Picot said. Yes, Colonel. I thought you would like to know that IX-26 has been diverted from its patrol in New Wayne to pick up an archaeological team from the Abroan Institute, said Hock-Picot. They are on their way to Kella now. Thank you, Colonel. My chief of data acquisition has asked me to relay a request to you, Hock-Picot continued. He would like you to attach a tracking and monitoring limpet to the target at first opportunity. In the 4A team's action plan, that was considered a mission failsafe. Colonel, I intend to attach this entire yacht to the Vagabond as soon as I can figure out where to do it. We'll do a hand attachment of a trammel then, if everything's still quiet. I'm not going to fire anything at her if I can avoid it.
Lando, said Lobot suddenly, look. The surface of the Vagabond had suddenly come alive with small, pale patches of light. They appeared and disappeared in orderly patterns along the top of the hull extrusions, forming sequences that drew the eye forward, and then to the edge of the curving hull where they disappeared.
Oh no! R2, look out! It's getting ready to attack!
3PO exclaimed.
That's not what happened the last time they fired, said Lando.
The last time they fired, we were 2 clicks away, Lobot reminded him. We wouldn't have been able to see this stage from there.
Some thought here that this is engine activity, and the target is preparing to jump into hyperspace, said Hock-Picot over the comm. Suggest you back away and launch that limpet now. You may not get another chance.
There is another possibility, said Lobot. This could be the next question for us. If so, it is one we're not prepared to answer.
General, I strongly suggest you drop the limpet and get your people out of there, Hock-Picot said forcefully. No, said Lando. I want to know what's happening on the rest of the hull, the part we can't see. Where do the lights go? Is there a beginning, an end? Lobot, where are those other video feeds?
I am monitoring, said Lobot. The light streams originate at a point aft of our position and diverge into 2 streams which wind forward along the hull, following the surface contours. Both streams end at separate points on the far side of the ship.
3PO, can you make anything out of this? We've got 2 streams again. Is this another duet?
I do not recognize this as any form of language known to me, Master Lando. But perhaps it is not linguistic, but symbolic communication.
What are you talking about?
Sir, perhaps they are pointers, not streams. Pointers. So, which one do we follow?
Master Lando, might I suggest that you follow them both, back to the point of divergence?
That's backwards.
Sir, the conventions of symbolic communication are not universal. You have been conditioned by the customs of your culture to extrapolate in the direction of movement, rather than to look for the source.
3PO's right, said Lobot.
You can follow a stream to its origin or its destination. Perhaps we've taken so long since we first signaled them that they've decided we missed the portal, or don't know how to find it.
Lando raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. Backwards it is, he said, and reached for the thruster controls. Watching the streaming lights flicker by and disappear in the direction of the bow, Lando could not help feeling they were going the wrong way. But when they reached the spot from which the light seemed to appear, a dark hole irised open there, and the streaming lights vanished.
Then fighting us inside,
said Lobot. Well, I'll be the last pup of an ion storm, Lando breathed in delighted wonder. So they are, Lobot, so they are. What kind of atmosphere did the survey ship record on Kella?
Nitrogen 75%, carbon dioxide 13%, oxygen 9%, water vapor 1%, argon 1%, traces, helium, neon.
That's enough, Lando said, putting Lady Luck on automatic station keeping. The droids won't mind, but it's a bit thick for my lungs. It suits for us, pal. Let's go get prepped. The yacht's outer airlock and the opening in the Vagabond's hull were mismatched in both shape and size. The solution was an old invention, elegant in its simplicity, which Lando had made standard equipment on all his vessels, an extensible cofferdam. Flexible yet vapor-tight, the cofferdam could telescope out from the hull of Lady Luck and attach itself to the other ship, forming an enclosed tunnel between the airlocks. Lando locked the helmet of his suit in place with a twist and looked across the compartment at Lobot. "Everything all right?" he called, more loudly than necessary. He'd spent as little time as possible in spacesuits and still had the neophyte's reflex of trying to shout through the faceplate.
"Everything is fine," said Lobot. "I have nominal pressure and temperature, and there is minimal interference."
"All right, then. Extending the cofferdam."
Lando pressed the switch, engaging a specialized autopilot which not only controlled the movement of the tunnel of rings, but took over thruster control for Lady Luck as well. The autopilot reported its progress in relentless detail, which Lando ignored until just before contact. "Beginning cofferdam attach sequence. Attempting magnetic lock," the autopilot announced. "Testing. Magnetic lock failed. Attempting negative pressure lock. Testing. Pressure lock failed. Attempting chemical lock 1. Testing. Chemical lock 1 failed." "What's that hull made of?" Lando demanded. "We may have to free fly over there," said Lobot.
"You sound almost hopeful."
"I've learned that it's something many people try on their vacations."
Attempting chemical lock 3. Testing. Chemical lock 3 failed. Attempting mechanical lock 1. Testing. Mechanical lock 1 holding.
Mechanical Lock 1 consisted of thousands of tiny composite barbs attached to monomolecular threads. The barbs were driven into the hull like so many anchors, and then the slack was taken up, pulling the cofferdam's ring seal snug against the surface.
"Any change, Colonel?" asked Lando.
"No change, General."
"She doesn't seem to have felt it," said Lando to his companions. "Pressurizing the cofferdam."
They could not hear the hissing, but the transfer pumps made the deck under their feet vibrate.
"Looks like a good seal. Pressure is holding."
"Good luck, General,"
said Pakpakat, reduced now to the role of spectator.
"I envy you."
Lando drew a deep breath and offered a jaunty grin.
"I might trade places with you if I could, Colonel," he said. "Lobot,
If you lose contact with me, take the ship out of here. Don't come in after me." Lobot cocked a questioning eyebrow.
Do you really expect me to follow that order?
"Well," Lando said, and the grin returned. "At least wait until I yell twice."
Good luck, Lando,
Lobot said, and opened the inner airlock.
Do be careful, Master Lando,
3PO called after him. The cofferdam's rigid rings had handholds spaced at intervals, which Lando used to pull himself along through the 5-meter-long tunnel between the ships. He paused outside the Vagabond's portal to switch on his suit and helmet spots, as the chamber beyond was still lit only by the overspill from the lamps at Lady Luck's airlock. With his own spotlights on, Lando's shadow no longer led the way for him. But the lights revealed little detail inside the Kella vessel, only an empty space enclosed by blank walls of the same mottled color as the hull itself. Grasping the upper rim of the opening, Lando raised his feet and floated himself through, twisting to look in all directions. He had half expected lights to come on as he entered, but that did not happen. But the lights he wore were enough to assure him that he was alone.
All right, I'm in, said Lando.
This chamber is about twice my height in every dimension. Plenty of room for all four of us. No response to my presence yet. There's no light, and there doesn't seem to be another doorway. But then, I can't see any mechanism for the hatch I came through, so maybe I just can't recognize the exit.
Watch your assumptions,
said a new voice, B. Joe Hamax.
Just because you came out through a double-hatch airlock doesn't mean that's what you've entered.
Hey, B. Joe, I thought you'd be sore at me for stealing your date.
I decided to wait and see what happened, said Hamax. If she kills you, I plan to forgive you.
Thanks, buddy, said Lando, turning. Wait, here's something. That's odd. Looking back toward the outer hull, Lando thought he could see the attachment ring through the wall of the chamber, encircling the opening as a faint gray shadow. He turned off his suit lights, and the ring became more distinct.
Why have you turned your lights off, General?
Can you see this? Lando demanded. I don't know why or how, but I can see the attachment ring through the bulkhead. There's a gray ring, a shadow exactly that size, visible on the inside.
Not visible on the relay. Are you saying that the hull is translucent, Lando?
Asked Lobot. Well, yes. Where are the ship's spots? Can you sweep them across the outside?
Coming up.
With Lady Luck's brilliant spotlights trained on the hull, there was no mistaking the sight. The whole bulkhead glowed faintly, and the ring darkened to a sharp-edged black shadow. When Lando brushed his gloved fingertips across the surface, he could feel that the shadow was slightly raised. It's almost like a bruise, he said. Like the hull is swelling where those thousands of tiny grapples have grabbed onto it. R2, come in here. I want you to scan and record this.
That could be a self-repair function at work, said Hamax. Mechanical one does do some microscopic damage to the attach point. As for the translucent hull, General, you may have discovered why the ship has so few surface features. We're not seeing the true hull, just an outer membrane, probably differentially transparent to radiation. All the sensors are concealed underneath. By the time Hamax finished his speculations, R2 appeared at the portal. He chirped at Lando, then entered when Lando waved him in. The lack of handholds in the chamber was not the problem for the droid that it was for the General. Thanks to the array of small gas thrusters built into all astromech droids, R2's motions were far more controlled than Lando's, who found he kept drifting to one bulkhead or another, slowly twisting from side to side and turning end over end. You're getting a better image now? Lando called.
Much clearer,
said Lobot.
Are you ready for the rest of us?
There's nothing else to see, said Lando, switching his suit's flood lamps back on. The bulkheads are completely bare.
Does it appear to be the same material as the outer hull? Asked Hamax. If so, there could be any kind or number of sensors or weapons concealed underneath it. They could use that material the way we use one-way mirrors. For all we know, they could be as close to you as the nearest bulkhead, watching and listening.
Thank you for that thought, said Lando. But if this is a Kella ship, it's a dead ship. It's been in space too long. And Colonel, this is starting to look like a dead end. We may have to make our own entrance.
Lando, remember what we talked about yesterday, said Lobot. Any obvious path, any unlocked passageway may be a trap. If there was a big red switch in the middle of one of those walls, I wouldn't want you to touch it. Access must require more than observation. It requires knowledge. The perfect lock is invisible to you and self-evident to the Kella.
Maybe there's something about the modeling on these walls, said Lando, craning his head. It's the only thing in here I can see that could carry information. Lobot, 3PO, why don't you come on over and see what you can make of it? Bring the equipment sled with you, too. R2's making out like a fish in water, but the rest of us can use something to hang on to.
Lando sighed and touched a suit control to blow a jet of cool air across his face.
I haven't a clue, he said finally. Colonel, anything there? It was Bijo Hamax who replied.
No, we're stumped here, Lando.
Being stumped was my best strategy, Lando said forlornly. I was hoping that if we showed ourselves to be slow learners again, they'd give us another hint. Bijo laughed.
Maybe if we touched the right pattern of spots, Lobot suggested.
I touched about 30 spots already before you got here, with my head, my elbows, my bottom, my knees.
I said the right pattern, not a random pattern.
So tell me what the right pattern is, Lando said sharply. Light or dark, fast or slow, left to right or top to bottom?
I don't know, Lobot said. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's not your fault. What we need right now is a Kella brain, and we're fresh out of them. I knew I'd forget to pack something.
Lando?
What?
Have you ever seen Donati stain painting?
What? Lobot, you've picked a strange time to start practicing idle conversation.
Answer my question, Lobot said shortly.
All right. No, I haven't. What's that got to do with anything?
To human perception, stain painting consists of huge canvases covered with random splotches of color. The Donati sit and stare at a painting for 10 minutes or more at a time. If they stare long enough and practice what they call looking past, something happens in their brain that turns the splotches into a three-dimensional image.
I've seen it, said Hamax. Strangest thing. The Donati go into this meditation thing and end up in a state of high rapture over something that might as well be a hallucination.
But it isn't a hallucination, said Lobot. A Donati painting isn't an image, it's a stimulus to the perception of an image. The image isn't real, but it's contained in the painting all the same. It's a perceptual trick, and it only works for their species.
You think maybe if a Kella came in here, he'd see the answer right away?
I'm saying that these markings may have been made not just for Kella eyes, but for Kella minds.
Lando frowned and shook his head. Even if you're right, that doesn't get us any closer.
R2 is the only one of us capable of seeing the entire chamber at once. I can send him alternate sets of perceptual parameters, which I am retrieving now from the Institute for Sentient Studies on Barabu. They have the most comprehensive collection of neurocognitive models that exists. R2 can reprocess the image according to the parameters I provide and project it for us to see.
Sounds a lot like trying to fill out a sabacc on a draw of 4 cards to me.
Luck is chance informed by applied knowledge,
said Lobot.
You said so yourself.
I did?
You did. Stand by.
It is said on Gaius that a seed does not know the flower that produced it. What is true of seeds and flowers is true of civilizations and worlds. In the long history of the galaxy, many a family tree has grown too tangled to be clearly remembered by either ancestor or descendant. On 1,000,000 worlds and more, life erupted from creation's crucible of energy and time, and vanished into extinction in an eye blink. On 100,000 worlds and more, Life erupted from the crucible and would not be dislodged, brandishing cleverness and fecundity as its weapons against entropy and change. On 10,000 worlds and more, life erupted from the crucible and then transcended it, learning to bridge the unbridgeable distances, venturing forth as explorer and settler and conqueror to worlds far from that which gave it birth. And some of those worlds, touched with the gift of life in time, passed it on to their own children, until the gift had been passed across the eons to 1,000,000 worlds, flower begetting seed, begetting flower, until the galaxy itself sang of it. But in all the history of all that is, no species anywhere has ever known its whole heritage, for memories are shorter than forever, and the only witness to those hard first births is the Force itself. The people who called themselves the Kella had no children of their own. No colony worlds owed them allegiance. No free worlds owed them honor. The Kella had possessed the tools to leave their home world, but they had lacked a sufficient reason. But the Kella had parents they scarcely remembered, but to whom much of what they were and knew could be traced. The parents of the Kella had called themselves the Konet, and they had had many offspring, as had their parents, who called themselves the Aranafi. So, although the Kella had no children, they had siblings in some number, and cousins close and distant in numbers beyond counting. It was with the hope of finding such kin as the Kella might have that Lobot sifted the archives of the Institute for Sentient Studies. Lobot knew no more about the family history of the Kella than did the Kella themselves, but he knew the patterns and principles that applied. His hope depended not on luck, but on a well-chosen search algorithm, the thoroughness of the Archivists, and the fruitfulness and resilience of the Aranafi line. Or, at least, so Lobot would forever claim. Luck was Lando's game, and Lobot preferred to distance himself from anything so ephemeral and unpredictable. It was a silent rivalry, and Lobot took unvoiced pleasure from the times when Lando's way failed him and Lobot's own succeeded. He prided himself on playing a more precise and controlled line, where competence counted for more than chance and diligence was rewarded more often than daring. This time the reward was the mind prints of the Kota of Konai. The image R2 was projecting covered only part of one wall, but incorporated the patterns of the entire chamber as they would have been perceived by a Kota. Compressed, processed, and translated, they needed no explanation. The entire image had but one focal point and one possible meaning. "There," said Lando. "In that corner. There's your big red switch."
"I don't see anything," 3PO declared. "R2, you must be making a mistake."
"You're not supposed to see it," said Lando. "Not unless you have the right eyes. But it's there." Pushing off from the equipment sled, he floated toward the corner.
"General Calrissian, Hamax here. Suggest you have your R2 unit make the initial contact with its claw arm."
"Where's the Colonel?"
"Colonel Pakpakat is monitoring."
"Tell him I wish he was here," said Lando. "Okay, R2, you have the spot zeroed in?" R2 chittered enthusiastically. "Okay, let's ring the bell." R2 rose from the equipment sled where he had been clinging and jetted across the open space. The droid's left equipment door snapped open, and the telescoping claw arm extended toward a spot along the curved corner where the two bulkheads merged. The claw yawned open to its fullest, and a moment later touched the bulkhead. Nothing happened. "More pressure, R2, said Lando. The droid's thrusters spat plumes of vapor into the chamber until its silver body was visibly vibrating. "That's enough, R2, Lando said. "Let me in there."
"What are you thinking, General?" asked Hamax.
"That maybe this ship knows it wasn't built by droids," said Lando, extending his gloved hand to touch the same spot R2 had tried. Again there was no response, even when Lando's suit thrusters exerted themselves.
"We must have misread the instructions," said 3PO. R2, could you possibly have turned everything upside down?
The little droid's response was indignantly terse. I can't get any real pressure on it, Lando fumed. Maybe these Kella were stronger than we are, at least under these conditions.
Strength hasn't opened any Kella doors yet, said Lobot.
Lando twisted around to look at Lobot. No, it hasn't. Grasping his right wrist joint, Lando squeezed the release and twisted. What are you doing? Hamax protested. A spacesuit and a droid probably register about the same, wouldn't you say? With a sharp yank, Lando tugged the glove off his right hand. The air in the chamber was bitterly cold, and his hand began to ache almost at once. Tucking the glove under his left elbow, Lando spun back to face the corner and reached out to touch the bulkhead. It retreated under his touch, the surface folding back on all sides until there was a hole in the corner almost as large as a bubble helmet and deep enough that Lando was uncertain whether he could reach the farthest recesses.
He did it!
3PO exulted. There's some sort of handle back here, Lando said, peering into the opening. At least that's what it looks like to me. R2, get over here and get a picture for the folks at home.
General, suggest you reglove,
Hamax said while R2 attended to that duty.
The handle might be keyed to Kellen biology.
I guess we'll find out, won't we? Lando said. That's enough, R2. Anyone want to retreat back into Lady Luck before I knock on the door? Counting 1, 2, 3.
We're ready here, Lando,
said Lobot. Okay, then. Drawing a deep breath, Lando reached with his bare hand for the handle deep inside the hole. His shoulder was pressed against the opening before his fingertips brushed it. He had to slip his shoulder inside the hole and press his helmet against the bulkhead to close his fingers around the handle. Got it, he said. What do you think, Lobot? Push, pull, twist, lift? But Lobot never had a chance to answer. There was a flash of brilliant blue light outside the portal, and when it was gone, so was the tunnel to Lady Luck's airlock. In the next instant, the atmosphere in the chamber began boiling out into space, sweeping everything and everyone toward the open portal. Lando clung desperately to the handle inside the hole, though he lost his grip on the glove and watched it being whisked away beyond his reach. But both R2 and Lobot were being swept toward the opening, their thrusters unequal to the sudden windstorm. The equipment sled, with 3PO perched atop it, spun crazily toward the opening as well. The glove, far lighter and moving faster than any of the party, struck the outer bulkhead, rebounded, and tumbled out into space. But bare moments before R2 reached the opening, there suddenly was no opening. As neatly as the smaller hole had opened under Lando's touch, the portal knitted itself closed from edge to center. R2, 3PO, Lobot, and the sled all struck an unbroken chamber wall, and then began sliding aft along it. "The ship's moving!" Lando cried, feeling the acceleration pressing him more firmly against the aft bulkhead. "Hamax! Colonel, what's going on?" There was no answer, not even static. "Anyone on the Glorious? Respond!"
"Lando," Lobot called, "all of my links are gone. We're not just moving. This ship just jumped into hyperspace."
It all happened so quickly that no one witness was certain of all the details. Without warning, one of the Kella's beam weapons sliced Lady Luck free from the Vagabond. Another pierced the hull of the interdiction picket Cowrie and left it in flames. As the interdiction field collapsed, the Vagabond swung about with surprising swiftness and accelerated away from its previous course. The captain of the Marauders screamed for permission to fire, just as the Kella vessel seemed to suddenly stretch to twice its true length and then vanish into a blinding white pinch of space-time. Lady Luck was left drifting, the remnants of the cofferdam trailing from its airlock. "Do we have a good track?" Pakpakat demanded.
"Yes, sir."
"That's something to work with," he said.
"Sir, she jumped toward the core."
Pakpakat's expression did not change. "Dispatch her crew to recover the yacht.
Bring Lightning around to the target's last heading and jump her out 10. We'll go out 20, Marauder 30, and then walk it out at intervals of 1 light year till we get to the border. She's got to be out there somewhere.
Yes, sir. But how far? She could have jumped all the way to Biss, for all we know.
The mere mention of the former Emperor's throne world, deep in the core, darkened the mood on the bridge still further. "Let's hope not, sailor," said Pakpakat. "Let us earnestly hope not."